us a second to go live. All right, everyone, welcome back to our Past Perfect main stage. We are here with our first keynote speaker, Seema Rao. So Seema is the Deputy Director and Chief Experience Officer at the Akron Art Museum. She is also a principal at Brilliant Ideas Studios, which is a visitor experience consultancy firm that builds bridges and develops pathways to amplify museums and nonprofits' best ideas. And I took that straight from the website. I did not come up with that, Seema. So, she has over 15 years of experience in the museum world, wearing many hats and working on projects related to visitor experience, technology, and education, among many, many others. And in 2017, Seema literally wrote the book on self-care for museum professionals. So that's what we're here to talk about today. Our conference is all about healing. And I think after some of our heavy sessions of the last few days, we can all take a breath here with Seema, and she's going to talk to us about wellness in 2021 and how we can all be our best museum professional selves. All right, so take it away, Seema.
Thank you, and I'm excited, so excited to be here. These are both states I've been to and I love, and I dream about going back to someday. So maybe our paths will cross in real life. I love digital in that you guys can be in your own spaces right now, and I can be in my own space, but I hate that I can't see you all. So one thing I really encourage is that everybody feels free to put in the chat anything that they want to know. I will also say that I have my phone, and my Twitter handle is @artlust, ARTLUST. And you're welcome to, if you don't want to talk about this, some of these things are kind of heavy. And if you want to talk to me anonymously, you're welcome to send me a DM. I will check them. I won't check them during the talk because I'm not great at doing 7 things together. But afterwards, I'm happy to follow up. So if some things maybe are a little bit too, like you're sitting next to your boss virtually, you're welcome to send me a DM. The other thing I've done this year is that I am not putting up a PowerPoint slide. I'm just going to chat with you. And I will repeat myself. I have, we're going to talk about 3 big things. We're first going to start with us. Then we're going to talk about ourselves and our organization. And then we're going to talk about managing. And we're going to kind of keep with those 3 things throughout. And I will keep mentioning things. And I did it because a big thing that's a challenge right now is that we have a lot of overload. And I read somewhere that sometimes slides and having to kind of deal with a lot of visual imagery and make sense of multiple things, so like my words and a slide, can be overwhelming. Finally, in terms of accessibility, I just want to tell everybody, in case you need it, you are looking at, if you can't see, or if you would like to have this extra visual commentary, you are looking at a person who has brown skin, pink glasses, sort of black hair, swoopy, dangly earrings, a maroon shirt that I feel like might be smocked. I don't know. I'm going to go with smocked. It certainly has some sort of pattern on it. And then I'm in a room that is white that has lots to see. I don't know. It has a hanging that says, nevertheless, she persisted, and a fake cactus that was from an event, and I'm on a gray couch. So with that, I'm going to start. So let's start with you. Many years ago, it feels like now, I had written a book called Self-Care for Museum Professionals, and I wrote it just really for myself. I had worked at the same institution that was actually across from the street from the place I was born, and my parents had worked in that same neighborhood in Cleveland, Ohio. And I had I was the kind of person who had a lot of sort of stability. I had gone to the same school. My parents had the same job, just a lot of things were the same. And, that for very, very few people is that true, that I actually took classes as a child at the place that I worked. And in all of that stability, I think it allowed me to succeed for a very long time. And but then at some moment, I had this moment, and many of you might have heard me tell this story because I've told it often. But so if you have, sorry. But I was sitting in a meeting, and we were planning our centennial. And I had been at this organization starting in graduate school. And so this was 16 years later. I'm sitting in a meeting with the director and the deputy director at the time, and I was senior staff. And I said, You know, if you gave me a van, I could do studio classes with everybody in the whole county. And they said, okay, I'll give you a Mercedes Sprinter van. And for anybody who works in education, nobody ever says okay right away without any like metrics and like which underserved populations and how are you going to do it. And I think, you know, many of us understand that for some of our departments, funding is tight and nobody's ever going to, even no matter how big your organization is, going to be like, hey, sure, I'll do that. And I'll tell you, I sat there after years of fighting for like pencils, you know, like golf pencils sometimes, or, you know, anything, and, you know, really trying to have rational arguments and going into meetings with like, you know, here's a way I could sell it, and here's a way I could sell it. I ended up sitting there and he said yes, and I wasn't excited. And for me, that was a really important and illustrative moment, because for a lot of us, when we feel burnout, we actually don't feel bad. We feel nothing. It's the absence. And for me, that was a sign that I needed to leave. And so I ended up going to consult, which I loved. And then now I work at an organization that's about an hour south of where I originally worked. And and it's, you know, it's interesting to get to have that change and be in an organization again. But when I first left that first job, before, as I was just starting to consult, I came home here and I was exhausted. It was the kind of exhaustion that I didn't realize. So, you know, I'm not excited about my Sprinter van, but I do get it. And then we ran this program that became very successful. We did not literally do studio programs for every person in our like 2 million county, but we did go to every community, and we did go to all the zip codes. So we did a lot. I gave out something like, I can't remember, 25,000 free books to third graders and all kinds of stuff. So I finished that, and then I came home and I was exhausted. And I laid on this couch and I took a lot of naps. And then I thought, you know what? I can't keep doing this. Like, I can't just not do anything. And then for me, the book was the do something. And that's where I'd encourage you to start. You don't have to get the book, but the do something is a good place to be right now. You know, I was saying to Laura before this, and as I was prepping for this talk, I was noticing that, and I, you know, being somebody who talks about wellness a lot, and actually not just here in these keynote talks, but actually at work, I talk about it all the time as well. And I'm truly interested in how do we make work better by making people feel better about work. That I've noticed in the last about month and a half, there's been a real uptick in articles that mention the word burnout. And I think in some ways, like, I actually have avoided them. If I wasn't giving this talk and wanting to help make sure that I gave you sort of up-to-date information, I probably wouldn't have read them, because I do think there's a little bit of like, when you're feeling a little bit like when I feel hungry, all of a sudden all the ads are about food. I think that there is a little bit of that if you're feeling a little burned out, I would encourage you not to necessarily dig into those articles right now. The place I would start, and the place I did start at that time in my life, and that's where the book came from, was me. And what I did is, and the thing I'm going to say first, when we think about you and in terms of self-care, and I want to say that I'm not a medical professional, and my book was really created at a time when the world wasn't as scary in some ways as it is now. So I want to make sure that that's clear. And if like you feel, you know, if you should totally get professional help if you feel like, a therapy. You know, many organizations will have at least a phone line, and I have used it. I feel like you should avail yourself of all those resources. So this is like, I like to think of as icing wellness and self-care. And so the first thing I would encourage you to do is to start with you, and try to make yourself really in tune with what your needs are. There's a really good article. So I'm saying don't read all of them, but the one I would actually recommend is one that just came out about 2 weeks ago. And I can't, I'll put it up on my Twitter later today. But it was by the Harvard Business Review. And it was that everybody's burnout is different and everybody's way out is different. And that's really what my book advocated. And that's what I advocate in general. So the first thing I would encourage you to do is to make sure that you really focus on what things work for you. A thing I did, and I'm actually going back to because it's different for me now. My world is different. It's a lot smaller. It's basically this room. That I did a thing where I did 30-day challenges. So I tried different things for 30 days and figured out which things made me feel better. That seems pretty simple, but honestly, right now, a lot of the research about wellness talks about that each person has a different road to wellness. Some things are kind of universal, like are you drinking enough water and eating enough healthy food and getting enough exercise? But many of the things are a little bit more ephemeral. So somebody like me, and the reason I'm going back to these 30-day challenges is I'm an incredibly social person. I get a lot of energy out of chatting with people, meeting people. I am that person who embarrasses my children by chatting with people in the coffee shop line, and running people in the post office, and just sort of or noticing people. I love people watching. I just really get a lot of energy from that, and so that avenue is not available to me. So I've been really trying to notice what things give me joy. And I would say to you, have very lowered expectations about joy. So don't think about what brought you joy before. Uh, don't say, well, I used to love going to openings and nothing will fill that hole. Yes, you're right. Nothing will fill that hole. But let's think about other things that will fill you in a different way. So try not to think about the before. So, go through those. And I would encourage you also to try to go through ones that feel like you've broken certain things that you thought I would never do that. I think about, for me, I got myself some roller skates. I will say that my youngest daughter, who sounds like she might accidentally walk in here, but she has stolen my roller skates. But I got them because I was like, I would never do that. Like, I would never roller skate. And I have roller skated since I got my roller skates. But I forced myself to kind of break boundaries even more than I did the first time I did that book. And it's because our world is really different, and the you were before is going to be different. There was that New York Times article that came out recently that you could be a different person. I'm not necessarily advocating that, but I will say that some of your responses will be different. I think about even myself, like I would have eaten things. I used to eat old food. I would have, I never had any problem touching things on the floor and all that kind of stuff. And now I definitely have a different sort of response to things like that. Now I think, oh, are we going to share cookies anymore? I think my reactions have been different because we've all gone through this global thing. So to kind of just keep recapping, we have you. And the first thing I encourage is that you just spend some time noticing you and the things that make you feel better. And then the second thing I would encourage you to do is to try to break some of the things you expected of yourself, to try new things. Finally, in terms of you, the thing I would say the most important thing that you have is to know that it's okay to give yourself a break. And I'm going to say it again because it's incredibly important. It's okay to give yourself a break. It is. It is. I had a really good conversation with one of my colleagues who said that they used to really strive for perfection. And I said, it sounds funny, but I did too. But now, you know what I really strive for? I strive for feeling okay about where we got to together. And we were talking about how hard it is to give ourselves a break. And I think that's very true in our field, particularly because the competition is so great. You put out a part-time job and you have hundreds of applicants. It happens that way. We have so few roles, and especially in this field. And some of you who might be listening might be looking for work because you're out of one. A lot of right now, what's happening is systems that are out of our control. I mean, what could any of us have done? No, almost nobody could have done anything. The vaccine is coming. Most of us in this room probably didn't have much to do with it other than maybe to get it. Most of us were not the people who probably were the first people who got this disease on this continent. It's just completely out of our control. And in that situation particularly, you deserve a break. You deserve to be like, hey, I didn't do it that well. There's days where like I was just, thinking to myself, oh shoot, I really got almost nothing done today. Because I have a major problem intellectually with time zones, and I like could not. And mountain is my particular challenge. I it just doesn't stick, and so like I didn't really do anything because I just didn't want to miss it. And so I sort of just was, putting on my earrings and, kind of getting ready. And I thought, oh, I didn't do anything. Now, there's two ways I could have handled that. I could then spend the next hour beating myself up about how I didn't do anything, or do what I did, which is that I made a short list of the things I really want to do right after this talk that will make me feel like, okay, this will be okay. Like I could just, start again tomorrow. And that is, if nothing else, if like for the rest, you just look at my earrings and you don't hear a single thing I say afterwards, maybe just give yourself that. Give yourself the grace. Give yourself a break. I mean, you survived. We say this all the time at work, but I encourage you to say it. We made it. We did what my HR person said, like, what are some of our evaluation measures this year when we were doing them for the end for 2020? I was like, how about you made it? Like, let's go with a binary. You finished. The year got done. Like, that is huge. And if you can give yourself that, I bet then you're able to go into the first two things I said for you, which is to see what brings you joy and to try to break a few of your boundaries, because you'll have less stress on yourself. You'll put less, weight and baggage on yourself. All right. So those are the things for you. Oh no, there's one more thing for you before we go on to talking about leadership. So I said I don't want you to feel like you should read those burnout articles, because I do really believe that reading about burnout can sometimes give you burnout. It's like or I'm a highly susceptible, I should say. So if you are highly susceptible, I'm going to summarize a lot of these burnout articles for you. The key here is, and burnout is actually, I mean, what I was expressing about my van situation and how I didn't love my van the way I could have, is really, it's actually a very classic case of burnout. That oftentimes many people's burnout looks like that. It looks like the absence of feeling and just really kind of flatness. And that's a very common kind of burnout. Some people, you that means that you're like full on burnout. That's where I was. For a lot of people, burnout can be a feeling of anxiety or being upset, or actually having the opposite reaction that you might expect. So for some people, it can be something that I haven't had recently, but I do remember it quite a lot when I was more early in my career, where you just have uncontrollable laughing, where you just like, I mean, I remember there would be times that were so ridiculous, like a label had gone all the way to the wall and had typos that somehow got missed. And I was in a junior person in exhibition programming, and like it was just so ridiculous. It was like a Monet show or something. I remember just sitting in my office and just laugh. Like I couldn't stop laughing. There was nothing funny about what I was doing. I just was laughing, and like the tears were streaming down. So that can be another sign of burnout. The thing right now, and a lot of the literature has been talking about it, that because we're in a little bit of a terrible perfect storm for burnout. One, our field has had a real crunch. And so we have this situation where there's fewer people working in the field, and our funders are asking us to do more because of digital. And then we have the situation that the world is sort of quite overwhelming. There's a lot of overwhelming emotional things in the news, certainly internationally with the pandemic, and nationally with politics. And so you find yourself in this situation. And I know that the pandemic particularly has exacerbated many of our geographic differences. But I have, from reading, I feel like this is probably true kind of across our nation, that there's a lot of people who are just, after a whole year in intermittent isolation, have sort of just given up. And so you have this sort of situation where people are leaving their houses. That's one way to kind of, they perceive that's a good way to get done with this sort of pandemic burnout. Just like pretend like it's not there. And what I would say to you is that when you're thinking about, if you're thinking about burnout, and you feel like you have any of those symptoms, And I want to give you two more symptoms. One of them is that you feel exhausted, like you sleep and you can't, it just doesn't hit it. You just can't. And then the final one is if you feel disconnected at all. So if you have those, I would encourage you not to do the what a lot of people are doing with pandemic burnout, which is to pretend like it doesn't exist and just like keep going. That is not a good solution. It's not a good solution, and I'm telling you this from sadly vast personal experience. Because what happens is actually what I feel, and I think a lot of the research would say this too, because of sort of American society and our culture, our sort of capitalist society, you could work on burnout for years. So there's no, they sometimes use that expression rock bottom. Burnout has no rock bottom. And so that's why ignoring burnout doesn't help, because then you're like, how bad can it get? Which is actually a phrase that in my office we don't use at all. Somebody outlawed it, one of my colleagues, and we totally outlawed it. But in terms of burnout, you could just keep going. And so that's where those sort of those 3 steps I gave you, those are good places to start. Kind of, dealing with your burnout, because what you're doing is, and when they talk about burnout, a lot of what they talk about is that you somehow allow, for whatever reason, and burnout has no, you're not at blame necessarily, but what happens usually is that burnout means that you're not centered, basically. So you're like tipping, and you don't have an ability. This might be a metaphor that only works for a small group of this audience, but a Weeble Wobble was a toy that was like a blow up, or it could be, and it kind of tipped, but then it always found a center and it came back. And so somebody who is not in burnout can come back. And so what you do when you do the 3 steps I said is that you're actually developing resilience. And resilience is actually the counteracting to burnout. And so the 3 things I said: 1, you give yourself grace. 2, you look at ways that work for you, that bring you joy for you. And then 3, you try to break boundaries. Breaking boundaries actually is the best way. Personal boundaries, not breaking other people's, and we'll get to that in a second. But breaking your own personal boundaries and sort of testing yourself is the best way to kind of create your resilience, because that you will find yourself more and more able, because you've given yourself like permission to break something you expected, and then you've sort of reformed in that way. Oh, I didn't think I could roller skate. Oh, I can. Now that's a small success. And all my limbs are still unbroken. I managed to roller skate. Now I feel better. Now I'm going to try a different thing in a different venue of my life, and I'm going to break a little bit more boundaries. And actually, those are the things that help with burnout, because a lot of burnout, actually, some of it is just volume of labor, but a lot of it is also this sort of idea that you have a lack of control, that you maybe feel incapable of doing the things you're asked. And so those 3 steps are really to deal with burnout. Now, I'm about to move from you to thinking about us in terms of our organization. So how you lead wellness through your actions. But before I do, I still encourage, I can't actually see the questions. If you have questions about those things or about burnout before I move on, feel free to put them in there. And I can always go back. So a big question that a lot of people ask when I give these talks is, okay, so this is great. So now, I figured out, I did these 30-day challenges, and I figured out 30 days of drinking more water and 30 days of reading books makes me a happier person. But then I get to work and everyone's pretty unhappy, and I just feel like I really haven't gotten any further. Or another question a lot of people have asked me in the last 6 months is, how do I know I want to be here? And I think that's sort of the second level of this talk. It's talking about sort of how do people fit within an organization? Because organizations, are composed of people at many different tiers, and many people who come, conferences might be in the middle tier, bottom tier, top tier, but then they feel like the board won't let them do something. There's a lot of sort of interrelated but complicated parts there. So the first thing I would say to you is, and the thing I think you want to think about, and I've been thinking about this a lot, and I would encourage everyone to do this. I thought a lot about, why am I even in this field? Now, you notice I started with you, and even in all of those, I didn't say very much about museums, and I did that on purpose, because one thing that I think is really challenging in our field is that we are here for the love, right? We really believe it. We could have done something else, something probably more lucrative, something less stressful, something more 9 to 5. But we chose to be in this field. And sometimes I bet a lot of us feel almost penalized for that choice. I certainly have. And so a big thing that I did, it was around January, and I feel like it was sort of in the middle of my feeling really burned out. And I started trying different things, and I was, reading different kinds of books, and I, did some, I'm crafted for 30 days and stuff like that. I really asked myself, why was I here? And that's a really fundamental question I encourage all of you to do. Why are you in this field? Cool. Caitlin, I'll get to your question in a second. And if you, I mean, you might ask yourself this all the time, but I would actually encourage you to ask yourself this and to really reflect on your answer. For me, my answer was, I really, and it's funny because I've always worked with people. I do visitor experience basically on different kinds of levels. And I've always really had a pretty social job. But it turned out for me, it was really collections. And in fact, why I left consulting, which I really loved, and went back into an organization, is that I was really sad not to be able to dive into a collection. For some of you, it's about connecting collections people, and I would say I enjoy that. But in the end, it's like, for me, it's the object. There's no wrong answer. I will say that I've talked to a lot of people who are just like younger in the field, and I would, if I could do something else, I probably would. I mean, just to be really honest, I think if there was something for me that was different, that would make me feel as good as it does to work with collections, I would probably do it. But I just inherently love collections. Now, you might have a different answer, and we all come to this with different things, but I think that as you look at yourself, and now you've centered yourself and you've done some of those other things I said, and if you look at yourself in your organization and how you lead from wherever you are in the organization, it's really important to understand why you're coming at this. And it'll help you. It'll help you a lot, because organizations are full of people who come at this for different reasons and come together for the organization. So I might be about the collection, but the next person next to me might be about wanting to lead. One thing that I say to my teams is, like, I never, not once, I'm not like a failed curator. I never wanted to curate. Just not something I wanted to do. I've always wanted to work with collections and administrate. That's always been my goal. And I think when you do that, when you understand it for yourself, and then you start making, and the next step is being kind of like saying that to people. I say that to people all the time. I never wanted to curate. It's neither good nor bad. I encourage people to have these sort of open conversations in their organization about, to keep having them, because they might change. I don't know. I honestly had never asked myself this. 20 years into the field, I never thought to ask myself why I was here. And I wished I had, because then it would be interesting to see if it had changed. Especially when I really only realized I really wanted to be a part of collections until I left working with collections. But I would, encourage you to start having those honest conversations. And that's really the next step. And this sort of goes to what Caitlin was asking, and I'm going to read it aloud for accessibility. And Caitlin, I might be saying your last name wrong. Rumery, perhaps? My administration is asking what we need to do to combat burnout, which feels like a cop-out. I hear what you're saying. So it is a thing. It's like saying, I have actually not asked my staff to help me solve burnout, because, like, hey, is that their job or is it my job? And it is a little bit like, hey, kid, you're sick. Now make yourself better. You know, that's a little backwards. I would agree. I do suspect though, it's because they feel incapable themselves. And so that's why they're turning it back to you. It's almost like when evaluators say, how does this make you feel? I suspect that's probably why. Talking to my colleagues, we don't know what we know exactly. We just know that the current situation is not sustainable. Any suggestions on how to navigate this? So I would actually, I just said that you should, have some honest conversations with yourself. Uh, and I particularly encourage these conversations in car rides, showers, things where your brain is doing something else when you're cooking. There was a wonderful study that came up that those moments where your body is doing something that you're very used to doing, so you don't have to think about it, allows your brain to kind of go into really deep thought. So do that first. Why are you in this field? And I actually we talk about it at our work all the time. It's just a very common part of our thing. We talk about wellness and stress all the time. And what I would do to you, what I would do is, as a leader, all of us need to start centering wellness. The reason that we need to is because the thing we used to center was that we were all in it for the work. We were all in it for the collection. And so for so many of us, we have sacrificed so much. We did this for our joy. I mean, like I on my spare time look at contemporary artists on Instagram just because it's interesting to me. I came here because it was interesting to me. And so the separation between work and fun is negligible for many of us. And so when you start having really honest conversations like, why are we here? Then you do a little bit better. And then the next step, Caitlin and everyone else, is not to talk about how you're going to combat burnout, but instead start finding tactics to actually do it. And so here's some that I might suggest. One that we had that really worked well, and it didn't come from me exactly, but I certainly lauded it and kind of promoted it, was that we would take time off of social. And this year, our social media was basically like our education and community engagement department too. So our whole organization was part of our digital and social. And so we took a week off. It was in December between the 25th and the 4th of January, 25th of December and the 4th of January. But we decided that it was somebody else's idea, but it was a brilliant one, and I can't remember who, otherwise I'd give them credit. But we did that. It was quite doable. So rather than talking about combating burnout, that's an example of how we acted to do burnout. And it wasn't, and we're actually doing, it worked so well, we're doing another. Some other organization did this thing that we're going to try, which is that we decided we're going to have a week of study hall where we have no meetings and we just catch up. That's another way that we're actually combating burnout. It was not my personal idea, but as a leader, I heard it, and now we're going to try to make it happen. Both of those things didn't happen by accident. The thing that anybody at any organization can do is to help just make it surface things. To say, hey, this is really interesting to me. Hey, I read this article about wellness. Hey, I was at this talk and this lady said we should really, talk a little bit more about wellness. Many of you will be in situations where your boss will say, but like, that doesn't matter. My colleagues, I don't know if that is perfect where I am, but we talk about wellness all the time. Like but that's because they work with me, right? And so I really care about it. We actually use wellness as one of our metrics. When we book exhibitions, for example, we say, does this seem like it's going to just stress us all out? If so, is it worth it? Now, it's not that stress is a problem. It's like, how do you handle it? And one thing we might do is say the next one should be less stressful, or the exhibition in the small hall should be less stressful. And, but we talk about it. When we're thinking about working with consultants, we say, does that person seem like they would be good to work with? Will that be stressful? Is it worth it? We even when we talk about do we want to do that extra effort? Is that effort worth our staff stress? And particularly now, for example, our state is, we've moved into that burnout of pandemic and people are sort of free for alling. Is it worth it for the stress of our staff? Sometimes it isn't. We were like, you know what, we're not going to do that one. It's not worth it. So I know that not all of you work with people like that, who might be a manager who puts wellness first. And so that's true. But and I will say that my team doesn't. They do say things like, one of our team members did this and I loved it. And we do it periodically. We have quarterly refresh days that we just are days off. And they don't because like some of our teams they sort of float. They have to be within a pay period. They have to be a Monday or a Friday. And what we do is actually we have the whole department has to have the same day so that you're not getting all these emails. So overall for leadership, what you're doing is you're trying what you can do. And this is where another thing we often say in our office, because we work with a lot of partners who are very, very stressful to us. And we do pick our battles. And so from the middle or if you're not in a management position, all you can do is this kind of thing where you lead a good conversation, where you mention it to somebody, where sometimes another way you can do it is to say, a big thing that often comes up when somebody who's in a junior position says, but I really want to think about stress and wellness. Your boss is hearing no. Your boss is hearing, my board wants this to happen. My funder wants X to happen. And I certainly, as that comes down to me and my organization oftentimes. We had an enormous grant that required us to do so much this year, and it was very stressful to me. And I certainly wasn't, I even as much as I say wellness, sometimes I was like, we have to do this. Like sometimes you just have to. So you might be in a position where your boss isn't listening. And they're like, but no, the grant says I have to do this. And what I would encourage you to do is, in that instance, try to say yes, but mean no. And by that I mean a great way that conversation can go is, let's say you're in a situation where your boss says you have to run 75 digital programs this fiscal year, and you say, no, my mental stability will just completely be ruined. We can't do it. So that's one way that conversation can go. The other way it can go, and the way that it went with me, is that I said, okay, well, what are the terms of the grant? Let's go back. What did they say? What did they do? How did they define program? And in this instance, what we found is that the program just meant it had to be delivered at a certain time. And so for us, what we ended up doing was we just had videos that were already produced, and then we produced a few more, and we ran them at a certain time on Facebook Live. And we made our numbers, and we got great numbers and we got great engagement. It was called Lunchtime 5. They were 5-minute programs. It didn't take a lot of work on our end. And so what I did to my boss was not to say, no, are you crazy? Or even, I didn't even talk about wellness or stress. I never said any of those words to him. Instead, I went back to trying to think about, and this is one of the things that they really, a lot of the literature talks about when they talk about leading from the middle for wellness, is to try to understand and empathize with the other side, the person's stress, and the thing that's causing them the stress. Because they can't sometimes, it's sort of like Maslow's hierarchy, they can't see your stress for their stress. And in this instance, his stress was that he just doesn't want to go back to the funder and say, no, we can't do 75. And now I think on some level you might say, but come on, that's crazy. Go back and say it or fix them. But truthfully, that's outside of your boundaries. And just as, we were talking about, I said, the biggest thing I want you to think about for you should be giving yourself grace. For the biggest thing I would say to you in terms of leading from the middle or being in an organization, you and the organization for wellness, is to know when you have to pick your battles and know where it's just not something you're going to think about. I often say to my teams, and I encourage them to do the same thing. Sometimes it's just not worth it. And I taught my brain, and this was probably one of the best things I did out of that book, to take things out of there and just not think about them. I had that kind of thing where my brain, and it still happens. I mean, I'm human, but where things would like rattle around in there, and it was really challenging. Like I would just keep thinking out a conversation and being like, I could have done this better. And a thing I realized is that in our field, since there's no right answer a lot of times, and my dog likes to come to every talk I've ever given. We have a dogs and kids okay policy on Zoom, so you get to see my dog. It's almost like a rite of passage on a Zoom with me. But so to go back to what I was saying, that there are things that you really believe. And because you're in this field and you're here for the mission and you really have a passion, if you started with the first question, you figured out why you're here for whatever that is. And then when something triggers something that feels wrong to you, it might roll around in there for eternity. And if you can teach yourself that some battles are just not worth fighting, it will make your sanity and your ability to have to lead for wellness more feasible. Because Caitlin, really, you don't want to be the difficult conversation person. The difficult conversation would be like reading all those burnout articles. They're not actually going to appease burnout. Burnout will only really happen, be appeased, and moving forward into the new will only be appeased by action. And but sometimes some actions just won't even help it. And there will be situations. I mean, there was something today. I was just talking to one of my colleagues, and she was like, "Is it worth it?" I was like, "Do you think it's worth it?" She was like, "No, I really don't." And so we decided she was just not going to deal with that, because like it just we were saying it's that phrase, right? Throwing good money after bad. There's a lot of interpersonal situations, particularly right now, that are sort of like emotionally throwing good money after bad, because everybody is on burnout, or everybody's like just like. So I'm trying to read the question at the same time. Yes. So what's next? So now I've talked about you, right? And so for you, you're going to focus on, what makes you happy, breaking some boundaries, and giving yourself grace. For leading from the organization, you're going to start with sort of the essentials. Why are you all here? Second, you are going to start thinking about ways why are you here, and having those in conversations, which hopefully will lead you all to come up with some small ways to make work better, like my taking a week off. You're going to teach yourself how to sometimes weave those conversations into your conversations with your leadership that don't feel like you're saying no. And you're going to really empathize with those leaders to help yourself navigate that. So like figure out what's their real triggers. I always say to my staff, I'm really easygoing, except for when I'm not. Like everybody has a thing. Everyone just has something. Mine happens to be like certain design. There's certain design elements that I'm like, I just can't. I can't do like homemade graphic design. I just can't do it. And like everybody has things, so find that out about your boss, because that'll help you be able to navigate those. And then finally, you need to teach yourself to be able to like let go. And I will say the best way to do that has worked for me is to go back to that first you thing. So, a lot of the way that I deal with it when I'm very, very stressed is to read. I read a whole lot. And that is the best way I've gotten to get my brain to turn off when it just won't. But go back to those strategies that work for you to make you happy. That's the best way to, like, if your boss just can't tell them anything, then sometimes that you're just gonna have to let it go and go back to your strategies. So that's all well and good. But many of you might say to me, but these are like, great, thanks a lot, but my boss just won't. And I will say, before I move on to, for those of us who are bosses, who have management roles, before we move on to that, I will say, and this is a tough thing to say, but I actually say it, none of us are trapped here. None of us are trapped in the field. None of us are trapped in our organizations. None of us are even trapped in our places that we are. I do think mobility is a privilege that not everybody has. So I understand that. But if you are truly in an untenable situation, there are bosses right now, particularly, who have been overwhelmed by the pandemic and are just have gone awry. That might be a situation where no matter how much you say yes but mean no, and how much you try to like surface why are we all here and come to common ground and see how you balance out this other person, none of that's going to work for you, then that might be a sign. And you do have to, you have to kind of be realistic. Now, I don't think that's for the majority. I bet for the majority it can get better. But I've had given this similar talks before, and the stories that they've told me, I'd say, well, no, that seems like, and that might be true. I will say, if you're like, if let's say they mean the best, they're talking about wellness, that you're probably not in that situation, but it might be. And I've heard some pretty terrible stories during this last year. All right. So now I'm going to move into if you are in a management position. The thing for me about management that is a challenge, just as a manager, and I started managing very early in my career. Somebody left, and at like 24 years old, I was in graduate school and I was running an adult studio program for a museum. And I certainly made a lot of mistakes in management. I have made so many mistakes in management. I feel like I could just write a book about mistakes I've made. But the thing that I would say is that a manager is, in some ways, two people. They are the person who is doing the job they wanted to do. And a lot of us as managers don't actually get to do the thing that we are managing. I'll give you an example. I come out of teaching. I taught about arts and collections and studio for many, many years. Even when I was managing, actually I was managing studio artists, and I was also having to work at that time in that program. And I loved teaching. And, I think probably in the end, the thing that I did best in all my career will be gallery teaching. I loved doing it, and it's something that really gave me a lot of joy. And I can't think of the last time I've actually taught in a gallery, because our field often promotes people who do good in a job. You get promoted, you promoted until you're not doing the thing you love. And that's a real struggle. And so what I would first say to all managers is to think hard, sort of like I said about joy, what brings you joy personally, so outside of your job. Think about what brings you joy in your work. It turned out for me, actually, I really couldn't, I didn't feel like I would find joy if I didn't do some creation. And for me, a thing that I found that really after that January thing where I said I tried to think about what really brought me joy, and I found out collections were the thing. My social media manager had to go on medical leave for a couple of weeks, and so I ended up having to be the social media manager because we're a small organization. And so, or I was she's the social media manager. She has a person who helps part-time. So he does something else part-time. He's a full-time person who does this part-time. All the social media managers get what I'm saying here. So, so we, at the same time that she was going on medical leave, we for a long story had to open a TikTok account that we weren't expecting to do. And I realized something really important about my management. I became a better manager when I went back to some of my roots. And so I encourage you, because I'm very proud of our TikTok account. It does have my face on it right now, a lot of my face. But I helped us plan our TikTok account. My staff had already wanted to do it. We already had a strategy. So, I mean, it's not like it just appeared. And there was actually a strategy behind it. But I realized I just really like talking about art. I like being with people and communicating about art. And so for the managers, what I would encourage you to do is think of your job as twofold. The thing that you really love yourself about yourself, and then the thing that you do to help your team do better. The reason I say this is because I do really believe one of the challenges that we have as managers is that we sacrifice one or the other. I've had managers who are just about the thing that they really care about. They just want to curate, they just want to write the book, and then they just like have to do this other thing, like helping other people. I've had other managers who have nothing to care about. And then what happens in that instance is they often take credit for the things that you've done. which feels terrible. So then once you do that, you kind of understand yourself. And just in the way that I've said at the beginning, you should start with you and centering you. If you're a manager, I encourage you to center yourself professionally like that, because then that will help you lead for wellness. Because really, the thing about leading for wellness is you need to think of it not as a scarcity mentality. You need to think of it as actually a mentality of plenty. And so I'm going to say that again. If you're managing for wellness, you're not actually managing for scarcity. You're managing for plenty. So for example, we had, and it didn't quite work because our state shut down again, which added a little bit more chaos in our lives. But last year, we decided in about August that we were going to make no decisions in December. And we're going to actually do it again this year, hopefully. This was the thing I decided. I was like, you know what? Decision fatigue is huge right now. You can you don't know if you're allowed to go to the grocery store. You don't know if you're supposed to wear 2 masks. Life is like all these decisions, and decision fatigue is a problem. And as a manager, I, in fact, have the power to structure our lives so that we're not making any decisions in December. That is totally feasible. And what I did as a manager, and this is really important, and this is why Caitlin's example shows that perhaps the administration needs to maybe sort of rethink how they're doing things a little bit, is that the managers, no matter what, in the end, they have to lead for that, which means they have to structure the system for wellness. And actually, it is not structuring so no decision December didn't mean that we were giving up anything. It just meant that we structured our year to make it work. And the way we did it was that we do budgeting starting in January, right after the holidays. And so what we instead did was that we started a little bit earlier. We had those conversations internally in our teams in August. We wrote up our plans in September, in October, and we had interdepartmental meetings in September and October. And then by the beginning of November, all of that stuff was basically done. And we thought out, we made sure Members Magazine was sort of settled before the holidays and all of that kind of stuff. And then we went into canceling a number of meetings in December that we didn't need. And we also did another thing, which was that we decided these are decisions we can set off. This needs to be decided, but we don't really need to decide it right now. And maybe taking a little time would help us. And so what you see is that we still got our budgets done. We didn't sacrifice doing budgets. What we did instead was really encourage ourselves to think about wellness. And so we actually were in plenty. Now, I will say, and this is the thing, we also gave ourselves a break. So we ended up, our state closed in basically, they changed the words. It became an advisory instead of a mandate. But we basically, everything shut down in the middle of November. And so there were certain decisions we had to make, particularly for one big project. We launched an AR platform. And so we had to deal with that. It's called Interplay. If you go to akronartmuseum.org, you would see it. And it's a poster that an artist made that you can play with. And it was a really big deal project. And so we had all the decisions we had made kind of went up in the air, and we had to sort of redo stuff. But even then, what was nice about it is when that major crazy thing happened, it wasn't actually that stressful because we'd actually done a lot of the other kind of big deal decisions earlier. So what I'm saying for managers is what you need to do is structure for wellness in a way that makes you realize you're actually going to get more out of it. I want to give you a couple more examples of how I structure for wellness as a manager. So another thing that I do as a manager that I really encourage all managers to do is to have pretty open conversations with people about how they communicate and what's the least stressful and most stressful way to communicate. I, despite having spoken for such a long time right now, all by myself, actually don't love talking on the phone. And so if I've called you on the phone, my staff knows it's something that really needs to be dealt with right now. We use Teams. Some people use Slack. It doesn't matter. I encourage all my staff, turn off notifications. Unless I'm dialing you on the phone, it can wait till you get it. I know how my staff wants me to communicate with them. I know that this person prefers Teams, this person prefers email. And that is a way that a manager can manage for wellness. And they can put it into place. They can say, this is how we do it. Please put it in Teams. Please put it in the spreadsheet. And why you do that is because I assure you, people have grown into their systems for a reason. There was a case many years ago that I always think about and I always mention in talks. I had a colleague who is a very nice person. He still is a very nice person. I still know him sort of, on Facebook or whatever. But when I first started, he had a form, and you would call him sometimes on the phone, and he'd be to say, "Did you fill out the form?" And I'd be like, "No, but it's so easy. Like, he'd be like, "Fill out my form." And one of the things that I still think about and I really appreciate now, that is probably that there was some reason, I don't know what it is, I never asked him. There was something that happened that made him want to do it that way. And as a manager, I encourage you with your teams to, one, follow their rules. So if they want to talk to you that way, try to do that for them. That's like when you've decided that you're gonna like follow the rules of somebody's house. It's a really nice way to be. It's really hospitable and congenial. But it also probably that rule came because of something. Me, I don't like to talk on the phone actually because my phone is also I don't write a lot of things. Like I wrote my notes for this talk on paper, but that's about it. I don't usually use paper. I almost put everything in my phone. So it's hard for me to talk on the phone and then look at the thing they're saying. So like there's a reason probably people have these things. And even if you don't need to know the reason, if you follow that rule, you actually honor your staff. So that's actually another way you can manage for wellness. It's a very simple way. You could do it tomorrow. And it truly makes a difference. It makes systems work so much better. Another way you can manage for wellness, and it's something that we've done that I encourage you to do, but it's a little bit, is that you try to take apart something that's not working in your organization and have very long conversations about how this happens. What's the ideal? What's your ideal? And the example I will give you is our exhibition planning schedule. We did a systems diagram of it. And every team talked about how they perceive as the ideal for them. So that was curatorial, it was design, it was graphic design, marketing, development. Everybody told me when their timelines were, and collectively we built this diagram. And it was a monster diagram. But it's really helped us. Like, a lot of times there's a lot of things that are surprise pinch points. They're, pain points in an organization. Many people will say, I want more communication, but what they actually want is that they want what they want when they want it. And so for us, doing this diagram helped us see where we had unnecessary stress in our lives. Oh, so you like when I give it to so-and-so, I should just give it to you too? Oh, you just need like one sentence for grants, when you're a year out? Well, we already have that one sentence. It's here. I give it to, so-and-so for marketing, for the website. And it really helped us understand this. It was kind of a long process to get it done, I will say. And it did have a lot of difficulty in it. There was a lot of, it brought up a lot of, those sore subjects that particularly exhibitions bring up, because exhibitions are so costly and they have so many moving parts. And this is where, I would encourage us to be the person who is the decision maker to lead them, because then like you can yell at me, it's okay. Like be stressed with me, that's okay, but not with your colleagues, because then it creates sort of, unnecessary stress. But if somebody who's a manager does that and they say, here's our biggest thing of the year, what's going wrong, how are we going to fix it? And they can anonymize it, and they can really make it so that it's not me against you. It's not Seema against Bob. I don't work with a Bob, which is why I use that name. But instead, exhibitions against design even is not right. What you're instead saying, the art needs to move at this time so that the labels can be done at that time. It becomes completely neutral. And actually that to me, and we were just talking about it the other day, because we were saying, we're up on a year and that's when the white papers have to be done. And it really helps us, because then it becomes completely anonymous. It's not about Seema didn't finish her white paper for such and such exhibition. It becomes Seema at 1 year out, do this. And you have a metric to hit, and you don't have to say like, she keeps asking me and blah, 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 blah. Instead, it's just, here's the thing to do. And it becomes completely about, plenty. It's completely about, we can do this. It is accessible. It is doable. So I'm just checking my notes. I know it seems like I'm free-forming it, but I do actually have notes here. All right. So I talked about our December decision, no decision, and that was an example of how managers can plan for wellness and actually realize that it's not about sacrifice. It's actually completely about plenty. And I will say our December was very successful in that people came back in January refreshed. And it was good. Even though we made decisions, we made fewer, and it was actually very successful, and we'll do it again this year. The second thing I was talking about is managing with empathy. So trying to think about how you can make sure that you understand your people and follow their rules, and how much that really makes you a better manager and makes things go more smoothly. The third is, I think, the harder thing as a manager, to try to dig down and work collectively to find the real pain points. It is going to be the hardest one emotionally. It was really hard for us because, your staff will personalize it. It will always feel like he didn't fill out my form, or, she never does such and such. So you'll have to do a lot of things, and you'll have to bring it back up, and you'll have to say, you know what, this is really not about that. Let's just try to think like, what's the ideal? And people will have to. It's a thing somebody once, an evaluator I used to work with, used to say is that people will not, you have to ask people about the food if you serve food, because if you don't, they will only answer about the food. And I think that's a good metaphor for a lot of things when you talk about managing the big picture for wellness. If you just ignore it, and this goes back to the second point when I'm talking about leading for wherever you are about burnout. If you ignore burnout, it'll just exist. In the same way, if you are really trying to change your organization for wellness, you don't get to like skip through the reasons that some of these things happen. You just can't, because then they will fester and they will explode in ways that are terrible. So you kind of have to do it. But that's why I encourage something where you like do a systems diagram about a program, for example, because then you have an outcome that is very that means that you've actually made change. And that's sort of my final overall point for my talk, that one of the biggest things I say for all of these three parts, so for the thing about you outside of your job, for you in your job from whatever role you are, and then for management, is that you need to feel like you've done something. And I think a lot of people, and this is really not an ad for my book, because you don't need it. You heard the talk. But I think for a lot of people who've used the book have told me that they just felt like they were doing something. They were making some action. They were thinking about themselves a little bit more. They were thinking about their job a little bit more. And I think particularly now, where so much feels out of your control, that there's just so many unknowns in the world. Feeling like you've done something and made some incremental change is incredibly important. It's more important than ever. So even if you do one of those things, and if you had to pick all of this and you stop listening at 4:45 my time, sorry, 2:45, and you just gave yourself more grace today, you did one thing. You did a thing. It's huge. And then you should commend yourself on all the little things you've done. Commend yourself on every day that you felt like you drank a little bit more water. Commend yourself on every day that you went to work and turned in your emails and did all the things you were supposed to do. Commend yourself when you did half of the things you were supposed to do. If you can feel like you did a thing, if you can make any change at all for yourself, for your organization, and as a manager, you should commend yourself. All of the actions that you do for wellness will feel good if you feel like some change has happened. The only way, though, you're going to feel it is, to go back to where I started, you need to be, as much as you can, try to be self-aware. be the person who is, and I was saying, and be the cheerleader. Like we did something, I'll say the final example I'll give as a leader, but I think it's a great summary of making change. A year ago March, our staff was really stressed, and I said, you know what? We're just going to blanket decide for one whole year, there are no live programs. Our funders will kind of beg us, but we're just going to say no. Because we were just like trying to decide, it was a waste of our time and energy. And like, it just didn't seem like a good choice for me as a leader with a small organization to go back and forth and even like decide on like, if this, then that. We just was like, no. But what we're going to do is sink our energy into something big. And what we sunk our energy into is we're in a small, it's a small, I guess it's the 6th largest city in Ohio. And it's a small urban area, and we're downtown. It's a very small downtown, but we're downtown, and we have a green space. It's about, I think it's a quarter acre, but in a very urban place. And so it is like the green space, one of 2 green spaces downtown. And so there was a couple of people who said, you know what I really want to do? I know that next summer people are just going to be like, have cabin fever and they're going to want to go somewhere. And I really think we should do a garden installation for an artist. And so what we did was we decided last year, a little bit, it was probably last, maybe it was last May or June, I can't remember anymore, that we were going to do this. And we sort of restructured our budgets to do it. We did all this stuff to make it happen. And it's about to install in 3 weeks. I talked to the artist yesterday and he still hasn't finished the work. So we'll see what it is. It's an artist whose name is Jordan Wong. You can look at our website. It's glorious. It's beautiful. And it is a installation that will transform our garden into a gallery. And it has a big wall on one side and a big wall on one side and then 2 sculptures, which, maybe for some organizations that's happened before. But I've been saying to our staff, and this is where I want to talk, just end where I started. It's been happening, and there's like a lot of, if anybody's worked with living artists, it's a lot of emails and correspondence and handholding and all that kind of stuff. And I said to them, you know what, let's stop for a second, because we had so many emails about something. And I was like, can we all just celebrate the fact that we just did this? We, in a pandemic, are about to launch the first garden installation this organization has ever done. Somebody said in a meeting we'd want to do this, and we did this. We're going to do this. And you can be from any role. You could just do it for yourself, for your successes. You could do it in the middle of an organization, but you certainly should do it as a manager. Try to be aware and laud all those successes, because that is truly the only thing you can do right now. That's it. We can only celebrate every incremental change. We can only laud our successes, because there's like really no better way to go forward. So with that happy note, I end. I hope all of you stay very well. I think, Laura, I have time for questions, right? See what she said. Yes, good. Are there any questions? I wished I could see your faces. I can't even tell if there'll be questions. While you're looking for questions, actually, I'm going to do that. I'm going to get that Harvard business, put it in here. I don't know if, Laura, you have any questions?
I can come on screen with you so you're not all alone anymore.
That would be great. I would love that. Hello.
Hello. Well, thank you for coming on and sharing all of your amazing experiences with us, I think.
I was glad to do it. You know what? I can't apparently find it. Give me a sec. Do you have any questions, Laura? Or do you have anything you want me to talk about that I've missed? I feel like I talked so incredibly fast. I'm sorry. I chugged a tea before I started this.
I think we're right on pace for how everybody's operating these days. It was good.
I do. That part I think is very true. Oh, thank you, Stephanie. Oh, yes. This is a good question. What role do professional organizations play in promoting self-reflection and wellness? I think I would say that and I'm a proud board member of Ohio Museums Association. And I said to Laura, we had our conference last week, and I have led kind of a yearly chat about wellness on Twitter, or OMA chat. But we did it not because I am on that board, but because one of our members asked us. And so I would say that, and I have written for AAM before about wellness, and I think I was part of it was a Trends Watch a couple of years ago. So I do think professional organizations can support wellness and reflection. I think partly it's very good for managers, because when they see it in the conference, they're like, oh, like my manager said to me, oh, did you see that Ohio Museums Association is doing a chat about wellness? And I said, yeah, not only did I see it, I am the person who's doing it. Like, but I think that it's twofold. It's us as members of associations making sure that we make it part of it, because the association most often, at least from my side as a board member, we're often trying to augment and support the members. So if a member says to us, like I was saying to Laura, I heard that you had a wonderful and very difficult session about thinking about land acknowledgements, and we're going to do it next year because our members asked us to do that. So for a good professional organization, and I feel like from the things I was reading about what you've had, it's true for you, and I think that oftentimes it has to reflect what the populace wants. So I would say it's also important for the professionals in our organization to say, this is what you want. And I think that I think that that's really imperative. A couple of years ago, I did a talk about experience at Western Museums Association, and a thing that I think is important also for professional organizations, particularly not AAM, but the smaller ones, the state ones, the regional ones, is that it allows people to have the story they need. And I think about like the state that I live in. We have a massive divide. We're very purple because we're 50% urban and 50% rural, and we could not be more different. Like if you ask me, I took a quiz recently about Ohio. I couldn't say or find half of the names on that. And that is very classic. It was because we were proving that rural Ohio is very split from urban Ohio. It was like something for work. And so I would say to you, the organization that will help you most and help you on self-reflection and wellness for you will be your state and regional ones. And I learned a lot about the West. Both I was a discussant once at a conference in Arizona, and then also Western Museums Association. And MCN was once in Denver. And the West is, there's a lot of things that are so different than, like, if you go to AAM and all the, like, either one of the two coasts or the people who are presenting, their situations are different. Saying to Laura, Ohio, we were doing a preparedness thing. Oh, thank you for coming. There was great Danishes at that talk. I was giving it. We were doing one about preparedness, and a lot of our buildings are some of them are pretty old. We have a lot of buildings from like the early 1800s here in Ohio, and we were like, oh, your building's falling apart. My building's falling apart, and so that's really important to me. But yours might be a different thing, and we don't have fires. That's just not, well, we have fires certainly, but not like brush fires, and we just don't have that. We don't have sort of open land. We also don't have one of the things I've noticed about the West is the kinds of museums we have are quite different often than yours. We have a lot of different kinds of needs than you do, so the kind of self-reflection you might have might be very tied to what you're doing, like the stories you're telling. I think about, I always remind myself that I have the lens of an art museum space. And I often talk to people like Ali Kong about historic houses. The kinds of things that you're dealing with emotionally are just different than me. I've never had a situation where somebody's like, oh, you know what? Like my family had to build this and they didn't get paid because they were slaves. That's just never going to happen in my field, because it's a different thing. And so if you're in a historic house, your sense of wellness is going to be different than my sense of wellness. I've talked to people in Denver. I remember having a really interesting conversation with somebody in Denver at the Science Center, and they were talking about, the ways that you have to deal about science, and your community might not believe in those things. And that's a different thing than an art museum person. So I would say to you, both your professional organizations in your region and then also in your field. So that kind of answers it, hopefully. Any other questions? I didn't get the question, but a question I thought somebody might ask, and I want to answer this, and then I'll say what you said, Laura. How do I know if I should leave? I usually get that question, and I do want to answer it because I think it's an important one. I think that wellness, I've really talked about it if you're in the field, and I want to acknowledge that there's a lot of us who want to be in the field who aren't, or a lot of people who are asked to leave for financial reasons. They were laid off. And I want to acknowledge that. And I also want to acknowledge there's a lot of us who feel uncertain if they want to be here. And I would actually say to you that the reason I said that thing, why are you here? Why are you here? Partly because I would say that's a good place to start. And I would definitely acknowledge that there's nothing wrong with leaving. If that's what you need to do, that's okay. And, I was thinking about, I have friends who've left, not during this, but the 2008 layoffs. And they're perfectly happy. It was fine. They still go to museums. They're still okay. And so I would definitely acknowledge that. So if anybody was thinking they were going to ask me that and they didn't feel like they could because they're sitting next to the boss or whatever, or they know everybody in the association, I wanted to answer that. Laura, did you have another question or did you have anything else?
Yeah. So we have a lot of very small museums in our region that are volunteer run. So, there are folks that maybe don't have a boss. They might only have a board that they rarely. So what would be your advice to people who are kind of going it alone on a really small volunteer team?
Yeah, that was one of the things I found really interesting when I was talking to people at Western Museums Association, and we do actually have it in Ohio as well, particularly in rural Ohio. And I will say that I have one boss, but people who work in a volunteer organization with a board have 12 bosses, or however many people on that board. Okay. Sorry, dog, car, barking. I actually think that one of the hardest things is being the only person, chief cook and bottle washer, and having a board. So I think that I think there's a lot of things that are topsy-turvy in our field. EDs get paid the most, and I think it's interesting that people who have the most connection to the visitor, who spend the most time with the visitors, often are the people who don't get paid the most. So I think there's a lot of topsy-turvy things in our field in general. But I do think these organizations, and I said historic houses sort of on purpose because I think a lot of them are the situations where you have the one person or the volunteer. I said on TikTok, so I am right now still for another month. My staff is actually building. The reason my face is the face of TikTok is another thing a good manager does is encourage people to kind of level up to get there. So my staff is actually creating a lot of content that you can't see yet, and it's going to start loading in May. So we've been working on it and talking it out and stuff. And that's why my face is there, because I've done social for years and I don't mind if people harass me. But I was reading somebody else's TikTok, which was a historic house that seems like they only have one staff member. And some random patron said, but why would you need an executive director? And I thought, whoa. And I think that what is very hard for those organizations is that people don't even know how it works. Like they don't know how it's open, who turned on the lights, who put in the labels. And so a first wellness thing you can do is actually educate people about your role and your work and how important it is. If you are, let's say, and in the West, this is probably very true. Like you might be the only museum, even if you're a very small organization, in your county. You might literally have thousands of people who you could support educationally. And so I would say the first step would be educating people. The second thing is you are the people who need the most of this, the boundary setting, the planning, the centering. That is you, because your board, as a deputy director, I do spend some quality time with my board. They will not have boundaries. This is their hobby. They're gonna message you I just went to my mailbox and one of my board members had cut out articles from the New York Times that I might find interesting and plans to have a conversation with me about them. Like I'm in school. Like, and some of the articles are about people I know. I was like, I've read this. I know this person. And I mean, a lot of our jobs are just smiling and nodding, and so you might have to do some of that, but that is where, and this is that's where you're like, okay, and I'm just going to throw it out of my head. It does not need to matter. So those are the things I encourage. And then I bet a lot of the people I've known who have like the one person jobs, they are very successful because they have a group of people, like some closed Facebook group, or social media managers know we have one, where you can say the things you need to say that you can't say to anybody else. Like your spouse will not understand why it's so annoying that they keep giving you New York Times paper cuttings, potentially. But the ED from the other organization gets it. And so that's what I would encourage, creating a consortium of help. Yeah. And I think affinity groups are great. I love AASLH. I think Aja's awesome. It's a great organization. And I think that what it does is it allows, a lot of the small museums, they're booming on social this year. Like Old Salem, I did a duet today with Old Salem. I love their TikTok. But think about the stress that it also brings them in. Right. I think digital, nobody else asked. In another talk I gave recently, somebody said, how do you wean yourself off digital? And we actually have had a lot of conversation that the managers have to be really thoughtful about this. I happen to come from digital, and so it helped for my team, but we have been having a lot of conversations about how do we wean ourselves off of digital? We have like a plan. We created a plan that like, this is now, we had to do this stuff for this grant and then the next grant. And my staff was like, but we could do it. No. When we were doing that thing in the fall, maybe we could. And I was like, nope, we can't. But I think we will be able to. Nope. And I was like, I would not budge. And now 6 months later, it's because I had come through this before, digital, that you sometimes have to. And I will say that I know that the AASLH group, for the small historic houses, particularly that had to do a lot of social, I know that they've gotten kind of a boost by being with each other and creating sort of like a community and, just kind of like, how do I wean myself off or how do I wean myself up? Because, there's the good and the bad and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, we have a couple more minutes. Are there other things? We're probably all so tired, right? Because you guys are hitting where I was hitting when I drank my tea before I started this talk, the mid-afternoon exhaustion.
Right. Yeah, it's 4 o'clock for us. So.
Yes, and it's 6 o'clock for me, which is why my dog was barking, because they were like, "It's time to eat food."
Yeah. Well,
I will say I am super easily accessible. So if you had a burning question, you can go to find me at Artlist. I am also the writer and I'm actually going to write up my notes, ideally soon after this, and put them on Museum 2.0. So museum2.0.blogspot.com. So I will write up my notes for this. And if I talk too fast and you were like, what? It will be in there and you can read it later.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Seema. This was a lot of really good information.
Good. I'm glad.
Yeah, it's always good to hear from you. So I think on that note, we'll give everybody an extra 6 minutes to just check out early today.
Enjoy those 6 minutes.
Yeah, enjoy them. And we'll see you again tomorrow morning at 8:30. We have a close looking warm up. So it's sort of a meditative art experience to start off your day. Yeah, it should be great.
Which organization are you going to be meditating with?
So it is someone from the CU Art Museum. Her name's Tracy Mcdonald.
Good job. That's great.
Yeah, so she's going to be warming us up for the day. It's going to be amazing. So this was a great way to come down and think about ourselves for this evening. And then tomorrow we'll start off easy and dive back into some heavier topics. So
well, good.
Thank you roller coaster.
I can't see you all, but thank you very much. And someday maybe I'll see you and I'll be able to go to your states again, 2 states that I love. And I will get to be in the world. And hopefully you will come to Northeast Ohio and see me.
Yes. Well, AAM is in Denver in 2020.
Oh, it is?
So
I haven't heard. Oh, that's fun. I do love Denver. I love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
So
Good
maybe
food,
we'll see you there.
good weather. I love it.
Yeah.
Yes, hopefully. Bye all.
All right. Goodbye. Have a good night, everybody.
You too.